The Green Children. I was there when they came out of the earth. I have seen things in 100 years of living that I cannot explain. I want to be clear about that before I begin. I am not a superstitious man. I was not raised to believe in things that couldn't be touched or measured or reasoned through. My grandfather was a physician. My father was an engineer. I was taught from childhood that the world operates according to laws and that the appearance of the miraculous is almost always the result of incomplete information rather than the suspension of natural order. Almost always, because there is one thing, one single thing in 100 years that I have never been able to explain to my own satisfaction, that I have turned over and examined from every angle I can reach, that I have researched and discussed and lost sleep over, and that remains at the end of all that effort, as mysterious as it was the first time I encountered it. 2 children, a boy and a girl, who appeared one harvest season in the 12th century near a small English village called Woolpit. Their skin was green. Not sickly green, not jaundiced, not the pale cast of a child recovering from illness. Green. The green of new leaves in spring, of grass after rain, of living things that have grown without sunlight. A green that had no explanation in the known world of medieval England, or in the known world of anywhere, and that the people who saw it could not unsee and could not explain and could not forget. I know how that feels, because I have been carrying those children for decades, and I cannot forget them either. And tonight I am going to tell you everything I know about where they came from and what they said, and what happened to them afterward, and why, after all the research and all the theories and all the decades of turning the mystery over in my mind, I still don't know the answer. My name is Elias Whitmore. I am 100 years old. And the Green Children of Woolpit are the strangest thing I have ever spent a century trying to understand. Let me take you to Woolpit first, because you need to feel the place before you can feel what happened there. Woolpit is a village in Suffolk, in the east of England. It exists today, a small, quiet English village with a church and a pub, and the kind of deep historical continuity that English villages carry without particularly thinking about it. But in the 12th century, in the reign of King Stephen, it was smaller and more isolated and surrounded by the particular quality of English countryside that has not fully changed in 1,000 years. Green and dense and ancient, with forest that in the medieval period was genuinely dark and genuinely dangerous and genuinely felt to the people living at its edges like a boundary between the known world and whatever lay beyond it. The village had wolf pits. That is where its name comes from. Woolpit, the place of the wolf pits, large pits dug in the earth to trap wolves that threatened the livestock and the people of the area. They were not a feature of a peaceful landscape. They were a feature of a landscape where dangerous things moved at the edges and precautions were necessary, and the division between safe and unsafe was not abstract. I want you to hold that image. A medieval English village surrounded by forest, with wolf pits at its perimeter. People who lived close to the earth and close to danger, and who had a relationship with the unknown that was more intimate and less defended than ours. People for whom the world beyond the village boundary was not merely unfamiliar but genuinely other, full of things that did not follow the rules that governed life inside the known. Into that world, one summer or early autumn day, the accounts are not precise on the season, but the reference to harvest time suggests late summer. 2 children came out of a wolf pit. They did not come from the forest. They were not found wandering in the fields. They came out of the pit in the earth. They climbed out of it as if they had come from below, and they stood in the English countryside, looking around with the disorientation of people who had arrived somewhere completely unexpected, and the local harvesters who found them stared at them in silence for a moment before the staring gave way to something else. Because the children's skin was green, I have spent decades trying to reconstruct the moment of that first encounter from the accounts that survive. There are two primary sources, Ralph of Coggeshall and William of Newburgh, both writing in the 12th century, both apparently drawing on testimony from people who had been there or known people who had been there. The accounts agree on the essential details in ways that suggest they are drawing on a real event rather than a shared legend. The children were brother and sister. The boy was younger, or appeared younger, it was difficult to determine. The girl was perhaps 10 or 11. Both of them were dressed in clothing made from an unfamiliar material, described as green as well, or at least of an unusual hue, woven in a way the villagers had not seen before. They were speaking, immediately, continuously, to each other, and apparently to the people around them, as though trying to communicate something urgent. And the language they were speaking was not English, not French, which the Norman nobility of 12th century England would have used, not Latin, which the clergy would have recognized, not any language that anyone present could identify. The sound of it, according to the accounts, was unlike anything familiar. Not in the way that hearing an unfamiliar language is unlike familiar language, not the experience of hearing words whose meaning you don't know, but whose structure you recognize as language. This was stranger than that. The sounds themselves were wrong in some way that the observers struggled to describe. The villagers did the practical thing. They brought the children to the lord of the manor, a knight named Richard de Calne, who was evidently a man of some education and genuine curiosity. Richard de Calne took the children into his household. He fed them. He had people try to communicate with them. He observed them. What he observed over the subsequent days and weeks and months is the heart of the mystery. They would not eat. Not immediately. Food was offered. Bread, meat, the ordinary provisions of a medieval English household, and the children refused it. Not in the way of children being picky or frightened, but in the way of people for whom the things being offered did not register as food. They looked at bread with what observers described as genuine incomprehension. Meat they showed no interest in at all. They were clearly hungry. You could see it in them, the lassitude of people who have not eaten, the weakness that comes from days without nourishment. But they would not eat what was offered. Then one day, someone brought in beanstalks freshly cut from the garden, still with the pods on. The moment the children saw them, something changed in their response. A recognition, a reaching forward. They tore open the pods looking for the beans, and when they found them empty, the disappointment was acute. They did not understand yet that the beans were inside the pods. When they were shown how to find the beans, how to open the pods, to reach what was inside, they ate, ravenously, with the relief of people who have found something they recognize in a world full of things they don't. For some time, weeks, perhaps months, beans were almost all they would eat. Other foods were introduced slowly with resistance. The green color of their skin was not paint or dye or costume. It persisted in all conditions, present in the morning and in the evening and after washing and through illness. It was their actual skin color. And then the boy began to fail. He had been the weaker of the two from the beginning, quieter, more withdrawn, less adaptive to the new environment. As the weeks passed and the world of Woolpit continued to be everything he had no framework for, he declined in a way that had both physical and something else dimensions. He ate less, he moved less, he stopped speaking even in the language that he and his sister shared. He was baptized before he died. The accounts note this with the emphasis that a medieval Christian society would give to such a detail. It was important to the people recording the story that this strange child had died within the fold of the church. He died not long after his arrival. The accounts do not give a specific time frame. The impression is of a child who had been displaced so far from everything familiar that the displacement itself became fatal. His sister survived. She survived and she adapted in ways that the accounts describe with a detail that tells you something about what the observers found remarkable. Her green color faded, not overnight, not in a sudden recovery, but gradually over a period of time as her diet broadened and she began to eat the full range of food that her new household provided. The green gave way slowly to a more ordinary English complexion, though the accounts suggest it never became entirely ordinary, that something of the original unusual quality remained. Her language shifted. She began to learn English. This too was gradual. The slow accumulation of words and phrases and eventually sentences that comes from full immersion in a language, from being surrounded by it every waking hour. She learned to communicate. And when she could communicate, the questions began. Where did you come from? She tried to answer. The accounts of what she said are fragmentary and filtered through the understanding and the misunderstanding of 12th century English people trying to interpret the words of someone whose experience of reality was evidently very different from theirs. But the fragments are extraordinary. She said they came from a land where there was no sun, not darkness. They had light, she said, but it was a different kind of light, a dim, diffuse, permanent twilight that was not day and not night, but something else, the only illumination her world had ever had. The sky, if it was a sky, was the color of a sunset, she said, or some accounts say the color seen on the horizon at dusk, perpetually, without change. She said everything in that land was the same color as themselves, as their skin, as their clothing, the green of new growth, sustained indefinitely, in light that had none of the gold of English sun. She said there was a river, a great river, broad enough that the other side was not visible. And on the other side of the river, across the water, there was a land that was luminous, brilliantly lit, more than they could bear to look at directly. A land of ordinary sunlight, maybe, or something else. She said she and her brother had been following their father's cattle through caves in the earth, underground passages, tunnels, some kind of subterranean network, when they heard a sound, a great sound like bells, like the bells that called people to church. And they followed the sound, through the dark, through the underground passages, upward, until they came out into the blinding assault of an English summer afternoon, and fell, disoriented and terrified, into the wolf pit where the harvesters found them. That is what she said, or as close to what she said as two 12th century chroniclers and 900 years of transmission have preserved. I need to tell you why I have been so consumed by this story, why out of everything in 9 centuries of documented human mystery, the green children of Woolpit are the thing that has kept me awake. It is not the green skin, as strange as that is. It is not the unknown language. It is not even the account of the underground passages and the land without sun. It is the girl. Specifically, it is the fact that she survived, that she adapted, that she learned the language and ate the food and faded from her original green to something more ordinary, and lived a life in Suffolk. The accounts say she married, eventually, a man from a village called Lenna, that she lived for some years after her appearance at Woolpit. That this girl who came from somewhere else, who lost her brother in the displacement, who spent months eating nothing but beans while the color slowly drained from her skin, she kept going. She made a life in a world that was not hers, that she had arrived in through a hole in the earth. And nobody ever figured out where she had come from. She told them what she knew. She told them about the land without sun, and the river, and the light on the other side, and the sound of bells pulling them through the underground dark. And none of it connected to any place that anyone could find. There was no land across any river that answered her description. There were no underground passages that led from a world of twilight to a wolf pit in Suffolk. There was only her account, and the green that had faded from her skin, and the brother buried in English earth, and the mystery that nobody then and nobody since has been able to close. Let me walk you through what the serious investigators have proposed over the centuries, because there have been investigators, not just medieval chroniclers recording a strange story, but historians and folklorists and scientists who have taken the account seriously enough to examine it with whatever tools their era provided. The first and most earthbound explanation is also, I think, the most compassionate one. It proposes that the children were from a community somewhere in the region, possibly Flemish immigrants, of whom there were many in 12th century East Anglia, people who had come from Flanders in what is now Belgium, and who would have spoken a language that English villagers found completely incomprehensible, who would have been outsiders in ways that the tight, insular world of a medieval English village made profoundly visible. The green skin, in this explanation, is the result of severe malnutrition, specifically of a condition called hyperchromic anemia, caused by insufficient iron and certain other nutrients, which can produce a greenish tint to the skin. Children living in poverty, eating a restricted diet, potentially surviving primarily on plants, primarily on green plants, primarily on things like beans, could develop this discoloration. It was a documented phenomenon in later centuries, known in some periods as green sickness. The underground passages in this reading were literal, real tunnels, possibly mining tunnels or natural cave systems that existed in the region. The children had become lost in them, disoriented, emerged somewhere unfamiliar. The land of twilight they described was a memory of underground spaces. The land across the river was a memory of the lit world above, seen from below. This explanation is reasonable, it is internally consistent, it accounts for most of the observed details without requiring anything that violates known natural law. It does not account for all of it. It does not account for the specific quality of their language, which observers describe not merely as unknown, but as fundamentally unlike any known language structure. Flemish would have been unfamiliar to Suffolk villagers, yes, but it would have been recognizable as language in the way that all European languages are recognizable as language to European ears. The accounts suggest something stranger than unfamiliarity. It does not easily account for the clothing, described as being of an unknown material and an unusual weave. Flemish immigrants would have worn identifiable European clothing, even poor clothing, even unusual regional clothing. What the children were wearing apparently did not fit any known European textile tradition, and it does not account for the consistency of the girl's account over years of telling. She learned English. She was not under the pressure of immediate crisis when she described the land of twilight and the river and the bells. She was describing in a language she now had command of what she remembered. Her account was specific and consistent and connected in ways that suggest genuine memory rather than improvised story. So we move to the second explanation, which is stranger. Some researchers, beginning in the 19th century and continuing to the present, have proposed that the green children represent evidence of a lost or hidden community, a population living underground, not as a permanent condition but as a historical circumstance, perhaps people who had retreated underground during some period of danger and had survived there for generations, who had adapted physically to conditions of low light and restricted diet, whose skin had developed, over generations, the greenish cast of people who never saw the sun. This is not impossible. It is not even unprecedented in its general outline. There are documented cases of communities living in very unusual conditions, and developing unusual physical characteristics over time. The specifics are debatable. The possibility is not. The tunnels she described, the underground passages through which she and her brother travelled, would, in this reading, be the network of caves and tunnels that this community inhabited. The sound of bells pulling them upward would be the first sound from the surface world they had ever heard, following it out of pure curiosity into a world they were completely unprepared for. The land of light across the great river, seen from the underground, that might be a description of the surface world as glimpsed from below. From underground passages that opened near a river, looking up and across and seeing the lit, ordinary world of England from a position below it. This explanation has a kind of terrible poetry to it. A community of people, green-skinned, and speaking a language that had evolved in isolation from all other languages, living in the dark beneath an English countryside that walked across the ground above them and never knew they were there. It doesn't close the mystery, it deepens it. Because if there was such a community, where did they go? Why have no other traces of them ever been found? Why did only 2 children ever emerge? And then there is the third explanation, the one that the medieval mind reached for naturally and that modern people tend to dismiss, and that I find, after a century of living, harder to dismiss than I once did. Another world. Not outer space, not in the modern sense, but another realm, another layer of existence, adjacent to ours, accessible through certain passages that opened occasionally and unpredictably between one world and the next. The medieval concept of fairy was not a whimsical thing, not the gossamer, miniature, decorative thing that later centuries made of it. It was a genuine cosmological proposition, a parallel reality overlapping with ours, governed by different rules, inhabited by beings who were human-like but not human, who existed in a relationship with our world that was occasional, uneasy, and deeply strange. The land of permanent twilight, the different kind of light, the great river that separated their world from the luminous land on the other side, the underground passages that served as the connection point between realities, the green of their skin which faded when they ate our food and breathed our air, as though the color belonged to the other place, and slowly left them as they became part of this one. I am not telling you this is true, I am telling you that this explanation fits certain details of the account in ways that the practical explanations do not. And I am telling you that the practical explanations, while reasonable, leave residue. They account for most things and leave certain things unaccounted for. The third explanation, strange as it is, leaves less residue, which is not the same as being true. I have been sitting with that distinction for decades. What I keep coming back to in the end is not the green skin or the unknown language or the land of twilight. It is 2 specific moments. The first is the moment with the beans. She reached for those beanstalks with recognition. In a world where nothing was familiar, not the language, not the food, not the light, not the people, not any single element of her surroundings, those beanstalks were something she knew. They were from her world, or like things from her world. The shape of them, the color of them, that particular green. And she tore the pods open, looking for what was inside with the hands of someone who had done this before, who knew that inside the green exterior there was something that could be eaten. She knew it before she saw it. It was memory. It was home, carried in the shape of a pod and the color of a bean. That moment of recognition in the middle of everything that was incomprehensible to her is the most human thing in the whole account. And it makes me feel, unreasonably perhaps, sentimentally certainly, that she was real, that something real happened, that the mystery is not legend or confusion or misremembering, but the record of an actual girl, in an actual moment, reaching for something that reminded her of where she had been. The second moment is the last thing the accounts tell us about her, that she married, that she lived, that she made a life. She came out of a pit in the earth, green and terrified, and speaking a language nobody understood. She watched her brother die. She learned, slowly, to be in a world she had not come from, and then she married someone. She woke up in the mornings and went about her days and presumably had ordinary things happen to her, and got old and eventually died in Suffolk, England, far from wherever she had started. We do not know her name. The accounts do not record it. We know her husband's county, roughly. We know she survived. We know she became, over years, something like a person in her new world, the green gone from her skin, the language of her origin still presumably accessible in some part of her mind, the memory of her brother, and the land of twilight, and the bells pulling her through the underground dark. All of that still with her. Until it wasn't. What did she dream about when she was old, when she was dying, when the ordinary life she had built in the ordinary world was at its end? Did she dream about the other place? Did she remember the quality of the light there, the permanent dusk, the green of everything? Did she miss it? Did she know finally what had happened to her? Did any of it make sense to her from the inside? We don't know. We cannot know. She died without leaving a record that survived, and whatever she understood about her own life died with her. Here is the question I am left with after all these years. After all the research and the theories, and the turning of the mystery over and over, in the way you turn something over when you're convinced the answer must be on the other side. Why do we have the account at all? Not why do we have the chronicles? I understand why medieval scholars recorded strange events. It was part of their function, part of how their world processed anomaly. But why does the account exist in the form it does? Why is it specific in the ways it is specific? Why does the girl's account of where she came from have the texture of genuine memory rather than convenient legend? Legends simplify. They flatten the details that don't serve the moral. They amplify the details that do. They move toward resolution and meaning. The Green Children account does not resolve. It ends with a woman living in Suffolk and a mystery that nobody could close, and that ending is not the ending of a legend. It is the ending of something that actually happened to someone and that nobody, then or since, has been able to fully explain. That specificity haunts me. The beans, the unknown textile, the bells heard underground, the river with the luminous land on the other side. These are not the details of a story shaped for effect. They are the details of an account trying to communicate something that the available language does not fully contain. Something happened in Woolpit. In the harvest season of some year in the 12th century, something happened that the people who witnessed it could not explain and did not forget, and passed on to the chroniclers who recorded it with the care of people who understood they were handling something important. What was it? I don't know. I am 100 years old, and I have been working on this question for more of those years than I can comfortably admit, and I do not know. Flemish children lost in mining tunnels, starved to the green of anemia, speaking a language so different from what their finders expected that it seemed like no language at all. A hidden community surviving underground, producing children who found their way to the surface through passages that have never been found. Something else entirely, something that the frameworks I have available, historical, scientific, folkloric, speculative, do not adequately contain. The honest answer is that all three possibilities, and perhaps others I haven't thought of, remain open. The account does not close. The mystery does not resolve. The green girl married her man from Lena and died in Suffolk and took the answer with her, and nobody who has come looking since has found it. What I have instead is the image I carry, the image I have carried for decades, and will carry until I can't carry anything anymore. Two green children climbing out of the earth into the blinding gold of an English summer afternoon, looking around at a world they have never seen, speaking to each other in a language that nobody around them understands, reaching for each other, maybe. Standing in the grass at the edge of a wolf pit, blinking in light they have never experienced, in a world they did not come from. They were real. I believe they were real. Something real happened in Woolpit to real children who were frightened and lost and impossibly far from home in ways that nobody around them could even begin to understand. The boy died, the girl lived, the world moved on, and the mystery stayed. My name is Elias Whitmore. I am 100 years old. The green children of Woolpit are the strangest thing I have spent a century being unable to explain. I'm not going to explain them tonight. I'm not going to give you the answer because I don't have it, and I would rather leave you with the genuine mystery than with the comfort of a false resolution. What I will give you is this. Somewhere in Suffolk, England in the 12th century, a girl with green skin learned to speak English and eat English food and live an English life. She lost the green slowly, like losing a language you are no longer speaking. She built something in the world that she had arrived in through the earth. And she never told anyone, not fully, not in any way that survived, what it had been like where she came from, what it felt like to come out of the ground into the gold light, what she missed, what she dreamed about in the long English nights, in the dark of a world that had too much light and too little of the particular dusk she had grown up in. We don't know. We will never know. That is the thing about some mysteries. They do not resolve. They only deepen and become more themselves and leave you, if you have spent long enough with them, not with answers, but with a quality of wondering that is its own kind of understanding. The green children of Woolpit are still there, in the earth, in the record, in the strange, specific details of an account that has survived 900 years because something about it insists on surviving. I have been listening to that insistence for decades. Now you listen. They were real. Whatever else they were real.